Welcome to the Emerging Biotech Leader, where we help biotech leaders maximize the value of their therapeutics from translational development to product launch. We're your hosts. I'm Kim Kushner.
And I'm Ramin Farhad. We are here to help you navigate the pitfalls of the biotech industry and illuminate the path forward.
Welcome to today's episode of the Emerging Biotech Leader. I'm so glad to welcome back Adriana Valenciano, the head of our client delivery team, to do a little bit of a debrief from our prior episode with Dr. Ed Tucker, where we hit on a lot of really important topics, particularly those around the role of the chief medical officer and their relationship with the CEO, the value of a TPP or a target product profile and how to leverage that throughout the development lifecycle. And I think most pertinently, how to think about innovation, the checks and balances within biotechs, and the right timing for when and how to start to build those checks and balances. So, Adriana, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Kim. I'm happy to be back.
As we think about some of the prior conversations that we had on this show more broadly, but specifically in the last conversation with Ed Tucker, we talked a lot about this role of the chief medical officer, but Ed made a lot of really important points around the role of the chief medical officer can either be, a path to success or failure, depending on the relationship that they have with their CMO or their CEO, and how the CMO-CEO relationship evolves, as well as the expectations of one of the other. Can you maybe give a little bit of your experiences and seeing how those different roles have played out in different organizations and what might kind of drive some of that success or failure?
Absolutely. And I have to say, I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Tucker when he was at a kind of a smaller biotech that then was acquired by a larger biotech. And he's had an incredible career to kind of build so many different functional competencies, but also the leadership competencies to kind of get him to really think thoughtfully about what it looks like to be a partner with your CEO. And he mentioned that, which I thought was a great kind of quote or, positioning was, even when you're interviewing for these CMO roles, you can have a connection with the CEO and you may get the job, but maybe you don't have the role. And I think that what was resonated with me and what I've seen with some of our other clients, both CEOs and CMOs, is how do they really define the areas that a CMO can present value to the organization as they continue to move along the development life cycle, not making it a stoic role where you're doing something, in perpetuity, but that you're actively working with your CEO to adjust the expectations and needs of the organization. And I think that the best CMO, CEO partnerships are when there are that open dialogue. And Ed definitely alluded to that, making sure that there's a good connection point, that you guys are having coffee on the way to the investor meetings and staying on the same page, or even when you're having those KOL conversations, bringing that back to the CEO and saying, this is what the field is saying, and this is how we need to adjust. So creating a lot of good connectivity as you're moving along the development life cycle, ensuring that the open dialogue is free and flowing as much as it can be with two very busy and dynamic roles.
It's so true. And I'm specifically thinking about the role of a first-time CEO trying to manage the dynamics with their chief medical officer, regardless of if they have medical experience of their own or not. Mm-hmm. But really thinking about what would be most value add in terms of advice for those CEOs and even how to establish that initial rapport, how to vet for that relationship orientation. It's almost an unspoken attribute in the interviewing cycle that is so hard to get right. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is. And interestingly enough, I'm working today with a CEO, not a first-time CEO, but he was formerly a CMO. And so there is sort of this duality and probably know-how that this person has beyond that of some other CEOs, where they're almost testing for what they see as those critical factors. And, it's kind of hard because they're really looking at it through one prism, and they're looking at it through the prism of the role that they had, which may be very different from what their organization themselves really needs. And so, when I think about this CEO as well as other maybe more first-time CEOs, I think they really need to be thinking about what is the scientific and medical remit that they need to get out of the role, not just the job, but the role, but also what kind of teaming and building approach do they want to have for the organization? How does that align with the corporate trajectory and where the company wants to go? And then lastly, I would probably say, are they going to create the cultural norms that, we want to effectuate in their organization? And I think that that's sometimes really probably a piece of all three of those items, but something that's undernourished. And sometimes, the cultural alignment between the CEO and the CMO can actually lead to different types of build or scale philosophies. And so that cultural alignment, even from the interview process and making sure that they understand how they want to build the organization, there's alignment there, and just really feeling like they can make sure they're building or scaling the organization in the same vision from a cultural perspective. I'm sure you work with a lot of CEOs who cultural alignment is really critical. I think CMOs probably undervalue that piece of it. They think that comes from the top in some ways, but I think it also needs to come from how they build their organization and what's the type of even innovation they want to bring about. Is it the type of processes or even program structures they want to have within their teams? Are we a culture of overall, decision making together, alignment together, or are we creating more autonomy amongst our functions? So really trying to suss out what that cultural imperative is for an organization is really critical across the CMO and the CEO.
I couldn't agree with that point more, especially the decision-making upfront and intentionality around where they want the culture to go, how they want the culture to be defined. Unfortunately, in today's funding environment where everyone is moving as quickly as humanly possible with as limited funding as possible, a lot of CEOs are seeing kind of cultural curation as a nice to have, not a need to have. And that mentality in and of itself drives a culture one way or another. And, biotech isn't going to be Google. There's not going to be, this crazy fun in-house culture of, ping pong and free lunches. But there certainly can be a shared vision, to your point, and there can be alignment to ways of working and expectations of the team. And it's a little bit goes a very long way in this intentionality. And it also brings us to a really important point regarding the CMO, which is culturally, the CMO should really be the beacon of kind of the scientific driver of where the company is going and bringing people along to that vision. So when we find CMOs who are constantly vacillating between different study designs and approaches, and they can't make strong, hard decisions, it's very hard culturally for the team to get aligned and to feel that level of security and focus that you need to very efficiently operate a business. And we're seeing more and more that companies are starting to cut corners on some of the foundational elements to driving that science, in particular, the role of a TPP or target product profile. We spoke to Ed about this idea that TPPs are not paper exercises. And unfortunately, a lot of people are trying to skip over them, thinking they are. But then, at least in my experience, I'm seeing organizations that are mid to late phase 2 haven't codified a TPP and are still kind of throwing spaghetti against the wall, trying to figure out where are they going to go, what's the indication they're really hoping to get, or what's the label going to look like, and how do they carve out that part of the market versus really designing that from day one and then building the company culture around what they're trying to achieve. So how does that marry up to your experience?
Yeah, I think, and as much as I definitely agree with you that, people are making and organizations are definitely cutting corners in terms of, cultural imperatives and what does that really mean for an organization and that is building, changing quickly, and that the, economics and the environment, the stakes are just so high. And so I totally get that. But I also see it as how do you motivate and drive people around a shared vision, especially when you have such tight timelines. People will go to work because they like their work, but we all know that they they also return to work and are happy at work and are more motivated when they feel a connection to the values, to the leaders that that are bringing them along. And so I do think that despite all of this, the economic doubt as well as the funding environment, there needs to be a place for thinking about how do we motivate our people and create the culture that is going to push them and work, to work weekends and nights to actually push these programs forward. So it's something I think about quite a bit. And to your points around kind of the TPP as that grounding foundational document, and Ed's, he said his hair went up on his back when we said is this a paper exercise or not? And, I definitely was concerned around many of the clients that we have that they don't use it as this sort of guidepost, but more as a, let's get through it. Let's use it as a way to throw spaghetti at the wall, keep things moving, but know that we're actually driving towards all these other activities, at a top line program level. And they're not revisiting that TPP and reminding themselves of the TPP. And I was recently working with a client and we were talking about some of the endpoints and what does it mean to reach efficacy for these endpoints. And the first thing I said, I was like, well, what does it say in our TPP? And then we went into kind of a longer discussion around like, well, is that really the target? Is it not the target? And I said, well, if it's not the target, then it shouldn't be in the TPP. And what is our MPP and how are we thinking about what, minimum efficacy is versus, what our target? And I think just making sure people are really thinking about that as the guidepost and revisiting it, not using it as just an exercise of cross-functional connectivity. It really is meant to be something that's living, breathing. You're bringing it with you as you go along the development life cycle. I think another element of the TPP that is, I believe, pretty undernourished with some of our early stage organizations is how they use it as a way to create that cultural connectivity and also bring in those values. I mean, it is meant to be a cross-functional document. It's meant to bring the organization together, bring functions together, and drive alignment on where they want to take this program. And so I think that all of these different assets that help actually bring the program to life can also breed good cultural alignment and bring teams together. And I know a lot of CMOs and CEOs who use that as a means to kind of bring people together in person and start talking about it, creating some fun exercises and Post-its and sort of diagrams to sort of kind of like bring it really to life. And so I think that it's not just, paper. It really can be a way to bring teams together and have some fun, hopefully, and good, collegial conversation.
Totally. I'm aligned to that. And in particular, that last point about the cross-functional discipline that comes with the TPP, in particular, collaboration with our CMC colleagues and those who are actually working on developing and manufacturing the product, it's absolutely critical to have alignment with them as we think about drug development. And the TPP is really the core place in which we actually get some of that alignment and how it feeds into the CDP. It allows us to be clear with investors of what to expect and when to expect it. So there's a huge amount of benefit here to taking that step back and doing it right. Mm-hmm. It also creates the foundation for this other topic that I know you're really interested in, which is how do we drive innovation in these early biotechs where, every dollar is a scarce resource that needs to go toward dosing the next possible patient. But we're seeing more and more this incredible opportunity for innovation, whether it's simply using things like ChatGPT in order to improve internal processes, or more aggressively to rethink how we do work from the ground up, from day one of biotech company inception, all the way through the drug development lifecycle, and reframe what we expect humans to do versus the tech to do, and what resources we need and when we need them. So how do we think about bringing in that innovation in these very resource-constrained environments that are already, to our earlier point, starting to cut corners?
Yeah, certainly. And I know that we had a great discussion about this at the SSI Executive Summit that you hosted, where we brought together so many amazing CEOs and CMOs to talk about innovation and how they're thinking about it in their business. And I think, it was a resounding, we're not sure yet, right? And I think that as a part of the conversation we had with Ed, we were saying, well, there are some checks and balances in place to help integrate innovation in some ways, and nothing truly breaks, right? There will always be a check and a balance to kind of make sure things can still move forward, and we should be okay with that. But I think the truth of the matter is that many of the organizations in these early phases who are moving quickly actually don't have those checks and balances. So innovation not only is scary because we don't know what it really means, but it's also we don't necessarily have all the mechanisms in place to integrate it in a way that will be sound and that will give us comfort that we can use it without breaking too many things. But what was great to hear from the executive summit was that there are small ways of integrating use of tools like ChatGPT, like some deep research tools that are actually helping some of our, Med Affairs colleagues really actually create amazing presentations and literature reviews to really substantiate the work that we're doing. So maybe the first step is just moving faster with some of the tools that are around us versus really some of the more certainly advanced ways of identifying targets and things like that. Let's walk before we run type of approach here. And I know so many of our biotech clients today, one that attended the executive summit that was talking about the rolling out of Copilot and how they're going to be using it as a tool for efficiency for the organization. And so again, I think it's all about walking, not running. I think that we can certainly partner with many of our clients on what that looks like. And I know CMOs in particular could benefit from so much of the creative tool sets that are out there, particularly for research, and making sure that we're kind of, not just using good old PubMed, that we're actually scanning broad data sets across publications, posters, et cetera, and really making sure that we're building those research libraries that are going to help us create our development plans.
Totally. The other variable that comes up a lot, especially with CEOs and CMOs in this space, though, is that when we're talking about innovation, we're talking about bringing in these large language models and other forms of AI tools to improve efficiencies. The question is, how do we rethink our workforce relative to the various tools that we're bringing in? And we're seeing kind of two different approaches that people are taking. Some are seeing the use of AI as an opportunity to get rid of the more experienced levels and saying we don't need as much of that. We just need a lot of doers. And we need people who can take the inputs from an AI solution and they can just go heads down and execute. The inverse of that is to say that AI is really going to actually supplement those junior roles. And I very explicitly use the term supplement, not replace. I think it is so far away from where we are today to think that we're going to fully replace any of these roles, but really supplement the junior colleagues, entry-level type roles, and then continue to bring in these middle to senior management who have the wealth of experience and can apply a lot of the research to what needs to happen first, second, third in order to develop the drugs. And we're seeing both archetypes start to play out in the industry right now. I have my personal bets of what I think is going to be more successful, but time will really tell one way or another. But I do think your point is well taken that most of these very early biotechs don't have the checks and balances just yet. And the bigger question that as an industry we haven't fully solved for yet is at what time does it start to make sense to build those checks and balances? When do we start to build the formal governance structures? And governance, I think, is a naughty word, especially in early biotechs that see bureaucracy with governance, but it doesn't have to be. I think it can be very intentional. And as we start to get more creative, we are going to also need to be much more intentional about building some of these structures to provide those checks and balances, even if it's in a very limited capacity in the early days.
Agreed. And I actually had a really interesting conversation with one of our CMOs, and we had actually done a research like search using one of these, large language models on a specific indication that we were looking into. We wanted to understand regulatory precedents, other programs in development. And we had, of course, the first thing that happens is you get this monstrous document. And she was looking at it and she was saying, she's like, I'm going to have to this is almost like voir dire. I'm going to have to really parse through this document to understand the relevancy of it. So it's kind of to your point around kind of what's around us and sort of the resourcing models. We're always going to need, those folks who are going to be able to actually voir dire and go through some of the research and really pressure test, what's applicable, what's not applicable, let's refine the tools, et cetera. But it really made our junior colleague able to pull research within a few hours. And so what would have taken so much time. So again, I see it as they need to go together in some ways, and bringing experience as well as, efficiency and also just kind of the know-how of operating with these different types of tools and how to adjust them. So I think that there is going to be a very interesting period of time where we are able to integrate them, but we will be learning a lot more. We won't be using them as effectively as we can. And that's where I do think the checks and balances of having very clear setups around voir dire or whatever it looks like at your organization to check the work. And that's always going to need to be the case for some time until these tools become, stronger and are trained in certain ways. I do think a lot of our clients are stepping into some of these more innovative uses of the tools that are around them, maybe not to create regulatory filings, but to inform their decision making and using it as a way to kind of, pressure test new ideas, pressure test new pathways. And I think that is kind of the best way people will get comfortable and then integrate these ways of working. To your point around when do we start implementing these checks and balances, I definitely feel like our clients are being pragmatic about it and really making sure that they're, not overbuilding, not overcomplicating it, staging it towards when we're really starting to look at our clinical data, and we have to really actually have the right data management approaches and, tools approaches to really safeguard. And that's really, I think we would, refer to our clinical operations and data management folks for the authority on this. But that's probably where we see so many of our clients starting to set up that governance and really trying to put it into place.
So, Adriana, I think those are incredibly important points. And what I'm hearing across all of these themes, whether it's the initial point between the role of the chief medical officer versus the chief executive officer and their relationship, the use of the TBP to intentionally drive culture, and how we think about innovation and checks and balances in early biotechs. To me, the red thread of all of these points is that biotechs are always going to reward the people in the organizations that ask really smart questions and are intentional about when they ask the questions and then how they pull that through into all of the elements of how they're building the organization, how they're developing the asset, and how they're balancing what's developing the asset versus building the company and kind of what those two key factors are. So I very much appreciate all of your insights and joining the show today. Hopefully this has been very helpful for others. And to Adriana's points, we did have some really great conversations at the SSI Executive Summit. We'd love to tell people more about it if they're interested. There is more information on our website. So thank you so much for the conversation.
Thanks for tuning in to the Emerging Biotech Leader, an SSI Strategy podcast. Join us each month for more conversations with biotech leaders. If you'd like to help navigating the complexities of biotech, reach out to our team at ssistrategy.com. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review.